Have you ever wondered what historically happened that generated the writings of the New Testament and the activities of the New Testament? We're going to discuss that in this video. This video is a part of a larger series of videos. If you go to our YouTube channel, Bethel Pittsburgh, go under playlists, you'll find a playlist titled The Disciple. In that playlist, you will notice that the title of each video says The Disciple, and then the category that video is under. This is under the category of church history. This is the fifth video of church history that we've walked through, and we're walking through the early parts of church history in the biblical time period. And in this one, we're going to walk through what happened to generate the things of the New Testament. So if you are interested in continuing this journey, I do encourage you to subscribe to this channel to be notified as we upload more content to this larger playlist of how to become a stronger follower of Jesus Christ. So what was it that happened that led to the developments that took place with the New Testament? Well, I'm going to give us just a real quick background of the steps we've taken so far in church history that you'll see in the videos that are right above this one. And that is that the Christian faith actually is the original religious faith. It is based on a relationship with the only true God who has always existed, and the relationship between humanity from the beginning to now. We see that from Adam all the way through the Jewish people, and climaxing into a further progressive revelation of what this faith is when it reaches the stage of Christianity. So Christianity didn't start in the first century. Its roots is in the original human faith and the actual true God. As we see forward movement from the Jewish people and the Jewish nation into the first century church, there are carryover ideas like sacrifice, went from animals to sacrifice of worship and service, to the gathering of believers continued into the first century church, as well as various authority roles and structures. So then we enter into Jesus's life, which is ranged from 6 BC to 33 AD. His ministry was somewhere in the range of 30 to 33 AD, about 3 years of ministry, followed by his death and resurrection. And then about a month or so after his resurrection, the day of Pentecost takes place, and the spread of the Christian faith begins, and numerous conflicts over that Christian faith, particularly conflicts over, is Jesus the actual Messiah or not? And that was the conflict amongst the Jews. Now, what we're walking through in this video is the New Testament missions to Nero. So we see Jesus did what he did. We got the day of Pentecost, and things began to spread. The first 7 years, so from around 33 to 40 AD, so the events of the Gospels have taken place. We're in the midst of the early events of the book of Acts, and no epistles have really been written yet. And it was around 40 AD that the faith began to branch out into the Gentiles throughout the Roman Empire. It first began with Peter's trip that we see in Acts 10 to lead, because of a vision and such, to lead the household of Cornelius to the Lord, which was a Gentile household. And then Paul gets converted again around this 40 AD time period to Christ. He was a radical persecutor of the church, and then he gets converted to Christ, and he begins to do a number of missionary journeys. And this caused a conflict, because up until that point, so the first 7 years of the Christian church, other than maybe a few exceptions, was predominantly a Jewish faith. And you have two branches of people in this faith. You have the Jews who did not accept Jesus as the Messiah, and then you have the Jews that did accept Jesus as the Messiah, which is the movement of the revelation of the Christian faith. Then as they begin to branch out, that creates additional conflicts, because the Jews felt this was a Jewish faith. They also felt like there was a need to continue to follow the all the Old Testament regulations. Some people felt that it wasn't necessary. And so conflict over whether or not the Gentiles should observe the entire Old Testament law was significant. One of the greatest conflicts was over the issue of circumcision, but there were conflicts over other things. So now you have three branches of people. You have the Jews who rejected Jesus as the Messiah. You have the Jews that accepted Jesus as the Messiah, and then some of them believed that Gentiles should hold to all the Old Testament laws. Some believed that they did not have to hold to all of them. And then the debate was, how much do they need to follow? And so getting into the specifics was a big conflict as well. And this conflict is what led to, one, it's the first demonstration, with the exception of maybe the Pharisees and Sadducees, but it's the first demonstration of a conflict between conservative and liberal Christianity. The more conservative you move, the more you expected people to adhere to the Old Testament rules and legalities. The more liberal you move, the less you felt like that was the case. And this conflict still exists within the church of how much of the Old Testament is supposed to be observed and or not. So that sits there. Now, one of the things is the New Testament hashes out that to go too far on the right end as far as requirements for the Christian faith from the Old Testament laws eventually becomes, it's spoken of as cultic, that it's a false religion. We see that in Galatians. And the term that gets thrown on them is Judaizers that we see surface throughout the New Testament. So in this conflict, it's debated on which one came first, but in this conflict comes the writing of the epistle to the Galatians, which deals a lot with this issue, as well as the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 to deal with that conflict. It's debated on which came first, but both of those events happened somewhere around 40 AD. Then as they progress, around 50 AD is when those two events took place, the writing of Galatians and the Jerusalem Council. Paul would proceed to take approximately three missionary journeys around the Roman Empire in which he would spread the Christian faith and start a number of Christian churches in the various areas. And that prompted the need to give these churches instructions and guidance in practice, in theology, and dealing with different conflicts. And that's why you end up seeing a lot of epistles from Romans through Philemon from Paul. The other apostles would write some epistles to add to that, but these epistles were surfacing because this was the management of those concepts in the New Testament church. Then the epistles as a whole were being written somewhere in the late 50s to the early 60s. So all of those epistles, as well as the writings of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and writing out the books of Acts, were taking place somewhere in that 15-year period from late 50s into the 60s. All of these things are being written down. So it's a short period of time that these things are being written out. Again, they're being written out because the development of this stage of the faith, the Christian faith specifically, stage of this whole faith, is being played out, and they're trying to organize and make sure that they're accurately documenting what Jesus taught and what was taking place, and so all of those things are surfacing at that time. The only exceptions are the Apostle John. His epistles, the book of Revelation and the Gospel of John, do not get written until we get into the 90s. But all the other New Testament writings are predominantly taking place from that late 50s to 60s AD. It was around 64 AD that an event began to take place that was wrapping up these writings. Some trickled into a little past that, but around 64 AD is when Nero's persecutions began to take place, and that's the next church historical video we'll look at, is Nero's persecutions. But Nero began to persecute the church for various reasons, and that ultimately, somewhere between 64 and 68 AD, led to the executions of the Apostle Peter and the Apostle Paul, which abruptly kind of sent the church into a frenzy and brought a lot of the New Testament writings activity to a halt at that point. So that's why Acts, you see, end with Paul under house arrest, and you don't get anything after that. And the reason why is because, like I said, everything kind of went into a frenzy at that point. And so we are going to get to the church history about that persecution and then how things spread from there. But that's why the New Testament kind of came to an end, is they were hunkering down to survive when that persecution began to break out. So if you have any questions on that, leave it in the comments, or if you have any feedback on the content of this video or this series, please leave that in the comments below. If you would like to grow in your faith in person, we'd love for you to join us. We are Bethel Assembly of God in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 2501 Staten Street. We meet Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m., Sundays at 10 a.m. Or if you're not local and you still would like to join us, we stream our Sunday services live on our YouTube channel at 10 a.m. on Sundays. God bless.